We start off in an empty bus, reading a letter from the local parish priest of our hometown. There was a barn fire which took the life of our grandfather, Florin. Even though the priest, Jeremias, assures us there's no need to make the long journey to the Alps of Mundaun, we go nonetheless. Our protagonist, Kurdin, seems to have some doubts surrounding his grandfather's death. The start of the game is simple yet effective. You can definitely see how The Shining and The Wicker Man were used as inspirations, starting off the story with a long journey to a far and isolated location. This is bolstered by the fog rising all the way to the road leading to Mundaun, cutting you off from the outside world. But the main influence was definitely The Shining. Even the creator himself said he wanted the music in the beginning to serve as a sort of homage to the opening of The Shining. I think the language also inadvertently locks and isolates the setting. All characters speak the Romansh language, a Latin-based language native to Switzerland, which is today considered by UNESCO as definitely endangered. A bit of a sarcastic sounding term, almost makes it sound like it's actually not endangered. Anyway, it is beautiful sounding. I don't think I had ever heard it before playing this. You reach the town of Mundaun and the game officially starts, as you get a look at Grandpa's burnt barn, and the most striking feature of this game, its art style. Every single texture you see has been hand-drawn, just simple pencil and paper, and it works beautifully with the overall folk horror narrative of the game. It's as if the story is being told to you through old drawings, and while closely inspecting the environment, you will find little imperfections that bring the space, in my opinion, so much life, like bits where the pencil wasn't as sharp, so it was blotching a little bit, or little smudges caused by erasing. This is a fairly short game, but the style never really got old for me. I was always looking forward to what the next environment or level would look like. But moving on, after you pet this goat, you notice a painting of the barn burning and are sucked into it, where you see an artist making the burning barn painting, which seems to somehow have caused the fire itself. In the midst of this, you hear what sounds like a soft and ominous call for help. In the rubble, a man extends his hand out to you. The man says he's an old friend of your grandpa. When you demand him to let go of your hand, he agrees. However, you wake up inside the barn, now with a strange mark on your hand, resembling the one on the artist. You find the charred body of your grandpa, who seems to have stoically accepted his fate in the midst of the fire, simply smoking a cigar. Very cool. I think it's somewhat clear right from the get-go that this man is at least a representation of the devil himself. The line, definitely conjures up images of the devil, who is known to make dubious or even outright deceitful deals. Also, the most noticeable aspect of his appearance is his shape-shifting face. In virtually all Christian traditions, the devil is depicted as a deceitful trickster, who is capable of taking many forms to suit his needs. I believe this is what the creators intended to portray with the shape-shifting effect on the old man's face. Now leaving the barn, you notice the fingers of your marked hand bending in a seemingly impossible way, and terraforming the rubble in front of you. After leaving the barn and walking towards the gate, the sign pointing to the town begins to point down, foreshadowing that the journey you are about to take will take you closer to the devil, or even hell itself. In an old barn, we pick up a pitchfork, which will be kind of our main weapon. It's slow and has little to no durability, and we are also introduced to, as far as I know, a completely unused mechanic, hiding. You rarely ever find a spot to hide in, and honestly, you rarely ever need it. I don't think I used it once in either of my playthroughs. But anyway, you move on to your grandfather's old house and find some food. After eating it, this menu in your journal will show up. These are essentially your stats. Eating food will give you more max health, drinking coffee will give you courage, and reading these manuals will make the gun you get later more accurate. I really like this. If you watch my detention video, you'll know I love when games use as little UI as possible and still manage to convey its mechanics to the player. And this game has literally no UI, which I think is especially important in a game as visually unique as this. Moving on, you go to the bathroom to take a piss sitting down. And take a look in the mirror. In this new little area that the mirror revealed, you take this little bottle of wine, and outside find this second barn with some strange masks on the wall. These masks, I believe, are based on Swiss carnival masks. This game has a lot of references to Swiss culture and folklore, and these masks make a continual appearance throughout the game. I believe they are a symbol used to convey the overarching theme of the narrative, which is disguise, deception, and hidden truths. Going towards the chapel, you see a little girl with black and white goats by her sides. Besides the perhaps more obvious biblical imagery, I believe here it symbolizes and foreshadows crucial moral choice towards the end of the game, which we'll obviously see later. After calling out to her, she throws a paper plane and the sun begins to fall. Within the paper plane is a drawing, showing you the location of the cemetery key. Before entering the cemetery, I desperately try to find a way to deactivate achievements, but to no avail. Achievements are here to stay. In the cemetery, grandfather's grave is empty, and so you decide to talk to the priest, Jeremias. You go into the chapel, which is actually based on a real chapel in Switzerland. Little details like this I think really help ground the world in some sense of reality. I just personally really like that. When you enter the chapel though, you fall to your knees and the old man shows up again. He thanks you for helping him get into the chapel, and mentions that not long ago he taught some people in Troy a similar trick, obviously referencing the Trojan Horse of Troy, and how you essentially served as his Trojan Horse. I do like a little detail in this dialogue, how he says not too long ago, as if 1000 years BC to today is a small amount of time to him. We can only conclude that he is as old as humanity itself. After that though, you talk to Jeremias, a very meek fella who seems to know more than he's leading on. After confronting him about the empty grave, he nervously warns you not to go to the barn, as it is cursed. Too late, hahaha, I already have devil herpes. You then leave, taking your grandfather's baptism candle. After going down the hill, you spot your first and most common enemy, the straw men. The straw men, I believe, are based on the costumes of the Eveline Swiss carnival, where it isn't uncommon to see people with frightening wooden masks and costumes made of hay. You could make here a comparison to The Shining, as it briefly touches on Native American folklore, but here it would be more appropriate to point to the Wicker Man, because it also uses pagan traditions deliberately in its folk horror. And the Eveline Carnival does have its roots in a pagan tradition, allegedly used to ward off evil spirits. But back to the game. The strawmen are incredibly slow, but have a ranged attack where they simply point at you and begin to cover your body with hay, presumably in order to turn you into one of them. After successfully evading the strawmen and making your way to the bedroom, you place your grandfather's candle on the windowsill of the bedroom shown in this painting of the house, presumably to protect you, just like Jeremias suggested. You then go to bed and place this
Werkhechel
on top of you to apparently fend off evil spirits. Now, you can find plenty of traditions, Christian and non-Christian, of ceremonial candles awarding some form of spiritual protection, but I could not find anything on this wooden board. So for now, I'll just assume that it's a completely original idea by the creator of the game, or that it's based on something incredibly niche and incredibly local. If you know something that could have inspired this, please tell me about it. You wake up the next morning and hear a knock on the window. And so you quickly go after her. I should mention now that this game is not very well optimized. I had pretty consistent frame drops the entire time, and I know I'm not alone in this. Even on consoles it seems to have this problem. It wasn't unplayable or anything, but it was a little annoying. Anyway, you make your way up this little hill and find Florina. Did I tell you her name? Fuck, I forgot. You find Florina with a paper boat, containing a drawing which you go into, much like the barn fire painting. You are now in the past, where you see a military man blackout drunk with a goat, and your grandpa, as a young man also wearing a military uniform. You follow your grandpa up the hill, where you see Jeremias, and Jeremias says, referring to the incoming army over the ridge. Florin laments over their corporal being a drunk, and the other man, referred to as HR, doesn't seem very optimistic either, when suddenly the old man appears. After that vision, you wake up in a church. The godly murals replaced with hellish imagery, and the smooth white limestone wall replaced with rough cobblestone. You pick up the severed head of a white goat on the altar and leave the church to see the trees dead as if burnt, and the sky raining down with stones. The raining of hailstones, or I guess in this case actual stones, usually symbolize some sort of divine judgment or punishment. Perhaps the best example of this is shown in the book of Exodus during the plagues of Egypt, which reads, "Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand towards the sky, so that hail will fall all over Egypt, on people and animals and on everything growing in the fields of Egypt." So you can probably guess that Grandpa and the others did not simply refuse whatever the old man may have offered them. Hence this act of divine judgment. Moving on, you go to the cemetery to take shelter under the big tree, and find Jeremias praying, and ask him about the old man. You then show him the severed head of the goat. The goat, named Alegria, apparently belonged to Corporal Valter, the man we saw blackout drunk in the vision, and apparently Florina is his niece. Jeremias tells you to bring the head to him in his bunker, but warns you that he's always been a drunken eccentric, and that the war only made him worse. It's too far to walk, so Jeremias gives you the key to Grandpa's study, where he keeps the key to his moval, which is a little truck used to transport hay. So you go to your Grandpa's study and solve this simple puzzle to get the key to the moval. One little complaint I have about this game is that the puzzles are incredibly simple. I'm not saying all of them have to be Silent Hill 3 Shakespeare puzzle level hard, but I would like to feel a little accomplished after figuring out the solution. You also find a list of supplies that your grandpa would give to Corporal Valter. Honey for Florina, hay for the goat, and schnapps for Valter. It doesn't say Valter, but we know it's for him. Anyway, now you make your way to the moval in this You use the moval to pick up some hay. The car controls are, well, they're not Forza, I'll tell you that. But with that aside, you make your way up the road and find another little house with a straw man in it. You can then fight him head on, or set fire to the hay, since the straw men are weak to fire. Just don't set yourself on fire. A nice little detail I only noticed on my second playthrough is this easel with a perfect shot of the church. Perhaps you can assume that the painter is the one who defiled the church and made the stone rain happen, maybe. So it's another piece of evidence that he is probably working with the old man. But let's move on. In the tunnel, you hit what seems like a dead end, but through your funny hand powers, you reveal a cave. In this cave, you can see a massive shadow of the old man in a cart with 5 stone statues. I believe these statues represent everyone present in the vision shown to us by Florina's drawing. Jeremias, Florin, HR, the old man, and the knocked over statue representing Corporal Valter, who was passed out in the pile of hay. You ask the old man where the tunnel leads, and he says, "Guarda svessa." Now in the next area, Florina is gone from the passenger seat, and you can run over the strawman.
Hammond, you idiot!
After getting away from the strawman, you begin to hear bleeding from your backpack.
Tia is alerta.
Kurdin decides that she's thirsty, I guess, and you place her on the fountain to drink.
Se sente sos meglio, mia cara.
Grazie.
So the goat can talk and says that you look like one of the men who did this to her. She then asks you where you found her, and then falls asleep.
Lo lascio dormiella. Sto se calà parozza den flying leech.
So you go and do just that, by finding some random person's house and just squatting in there. You make yourself some coffee and go to bed. You dream of a long, widening hallway. Statues stand in front of what looks like the burning barn painting that trapped and killed your grandfather. This scene reminds me very much of German expressionist films. The expressionist films, like any other expressionist art, I suppose, generally rejects realism in favor of a more subjective and emotional mode of expression, usually through some form of abstraction or, like the name implies, a highly expressive performance. This scene reminds me particularly of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. The way it plays with shape, light, and shadow really stands out from the rest of the imagery we see in the game. When you wake up, you hear someone walking upstairs. When you go to investigate, no one is there, just a bunch of paintings and different painting supplies. We are definitely in the house of the painter, Serpentini.
Serpentini. Exposizione. Pittura moderna.
We can even see here, both on the advertisements and full-body paintings of him, the old man's mark on his right hand, opposing our mark in our left hand, which could be a pretty on-the-nose metaphor for him being the old man's right-hand man, I guess. The centerpiece of this room is the painting of the bridge, with the center haphazardly erased, mimicking the real bridge. When you decide to fix or complete the bridge painting, and in turn fixing the real bridge, Serpentini shows up behind you, offended that you would touch his work.
Feest is nar. Ce festico?
You decide to ask him if he has ever painted a burning barn, but he doesn't remember, as he has completed so many works. You also ask him about the door with no handle downstairs, to which he pompously replies,
Bueno, wat dir se te in guata. Ma, az faccio un'eccezione. Antil schlere, scuccia tu al namnest, o le un'exposizione speciale.
and apparently many global elites will attend it, and surgeons as well, for some reason. I guess they're global elites? As you leave the painter's house, you notice the full body painting of him is now just a blank canvas, which I guess would imply that he can traverse through paintings. After all, we do something quite similar with the burning barn painting, or maybe it's just an ominous detail and I'm reading too much into this. What is verifiable though is the fact that the painter's house is based on a real famous house in Switzerland, the house of Swiss painter and illustrator.
Alois Carigit.
Moving on, you go through the bridge and make it here, the home of the beekeepers, and they are our next enemy. And also my least favorite enemy, for two reasons. First, they're just annoying. Their attack is sending bees after you. You then have to go into your inventory and pull out your grandfather's pipe to scare them away with the smoke. And this sometimes doesn't really work. Or you can go into the water, which is never anywhere near the beekeepers. And the second and most important reason of why I hate them is because they might be based around the bees of the Wicker Man 2006 remake with Nicolas Cage. And that movie is really silly.
Don't you feel silly? Don't you feel stupid? Don't you feel a little ashamed?
And it recreates the original 1970s The Wicker Man, except without all the nuance and intrigue of the original. I will say though, I do like their design quite a lot. They seem to be wearing what looks like medieval bee protection, what beekeepers in medieval Europe would wear to protect themselves. Their masks are just so off-putting, and in the context of the game, it does a really good job at dehumanizing them. And the track that plays as you get closer to them is also pretty good. Anyway, our goal is to get to that building over there to get the honey for Florina. But before that, we have to explore the surrounding area. When you go to this little shack, there doesn't seem to be anything there aside from this one noose and this candle. You desperately try to free yourself when luckily the rope breaks. I have a theory behind this, but I can only talk about it much later so that I don't spoil anything. For now, let's make our way to this other shack, where you will see hanged meat along with a soldier. I'm not too sure what this could mean, if it even has any sort of symbolic meaning at all. Perhaps it's a statement on war itself. Soldiers within an army are much like disposable meat, used to satiate the appetite of the war machine. Unless you think that's too hippy-dippy, in which case, just forget I even said any of that.
You know what? Forget I said anything.
He also appears to actually be alive still, which is quite unsettling. But anyway, you have another simple puzzle here. Touch the hanging meat in the same order you see in this window, and the soldier will spit out a key which will go to this house a little bit later. But for now, let's take this back way to get to the house with the honey, where you will put on this beekeeper mask, get the honey upstairs, and leave. Now, you make your way to the house in the middle of this area, with the key you got from the hanging soldier. In here, you will see a walkie-talkie, emitting some form of static. On the other side is Corporal Valter. You explain that you have all the supplies he needs, and he tells you to get some rest, because you will deliver his supplies at nighttime.
Adia, Corporal Valter.
So you close the windows and go to sleep. When you wake up, you see a shaft of light shining through the window. Looking outside, you see some floating lanterns, and on the reflection in the water, possibly the ghosts of long-gone soldiers. I really like this constant theme of peeking into the other world, for lack of a better word, through reflections, like how we tend to see the old man through the mirror. It's something the game is quite consistent about, and I really appreciate it. Luckily at night, the beekeepers are sleeping by putting the honeycomb they carry on their own head. It's a very surreal visual, seeing a landscape scattered with these people, perfectly still, with cylindrical honeycombs on their head. This game is really good when it comes to this kind of imagery. But moving on, you follow these lanterns which lead you to a secret passageway and some rocks. This is the entrance to Corporal Valter's bunker, so you pick up this lantern and begin to make your way down. This place is an eerie, claustrophobic maze, but luckily you are guided by shadows of soldiers who have traversed it before you. There's just something about mazes and horror that I've always really liked. I think it's the combination of claustrophobia mixed with the sense of being adrift and lost, that together cause this sense of vulnerability. Like, if something is out to get you in here, you have a seemingly infinite space, but paradoxically, nowhere to go. I wonder if this also took inspiration from The Shining. I mean, it's just a maze. Plenty of horror games have them, so it's not especially unique. But since we can verifiably confirm that The Shining was a source of inspiration for the beginning of the game, perhaps it was used elsewhere.
Now, attention! Is het recht?
And so you finally meet Corporal Valter. He seems to be under the impression that he's still in the war, an unfortunately common occurrence among war veterans. After giving him a bottle of wine, you hear bleeding coming from your backpack.
Oh, Cici heb je nou naar won.
Maar spetje, je bent slim. Jouw genossen kwam slim.
Corporal Valter instantly recognizes the goat head. Alegria was his favorite goat after all. You ask him about what happened back in the war, but he mumbles and vaguely throws accusations about your grandfather, without really explaining much.
Jij is die, meu smalle deutat.
He apparently did something to cause the death of his beloved goat, but that's all we know essentially. We then make our way to Florina's room to give her the honey, and she gives you this crank. We pick up this little thingamajig slash doohickey slash whatchamacallit and get this toy cable car working. Following it leads us to this area with a miniature set piece. We are now again in the past, the old man now present in the wooden barn, and your grandfather looking over a contract that reads,
Inolme non beteggiata del brat se tragli nemici alla knife. De Furnil diejava il disventer che questa obbligazione è ademplida. Al domicilio del creditur all'interno del Mundaun.
One of the other soldiers, HR, makes his way towards the barn, saying the enemy is now over the ridge. Your grandfather says,
Lu oisi scia. Il Tutpussent hagi misericordia con nossas almas.
and signs the contract. The old man makes his way towards the entrance of the barn. The old man reminds them of their obligation and disappears.
Ouça tocha que é vos de cumprir vossa parte de la fer. Ai as vetzin des dis, ouça vais e no chamchatais.
By now, you have probably guessed the soldiers, possibly from Florin's idea, decided to sacrifice the goat instead of an unbaptized child. This has two possible influences. First is the story of the Devil's Bridge in Norway,
Schellenen.
where the locals had such a hard time building a bridge over this river, they recruited the devil to build it. The devil, though, had one condition: the right to keep the first soul who crosses the bridge. So the locals decided to do a little trolling, and in one account of the story, send a goat in place of a man. This story has the one obvious similarity, which is the sacrificing of the goat in order to trick the devil. But another one is the bridge itself, as the location of the bridge in the game is visually pretty similar to the real Devil's Bridge of the story. The other story is a little bit more complex. It's from a novella called The Black Spider, by a man who, funnily enough, is also named Jeremias. Perhaps that was intentional. It tells the story of a village that was under the harsh rule of tyrant knight Hans von Stoffen, who wants this new beautiful walkway surrounded by trees in the village, and he wants the villagers to build it for him, which they see as an impossible task. They meet an old huntsman who obviously is, even to the villagers, representative of the devil himself, and he offers to build this walkway in exchange for an unbaptized child. One of the villagers, Christine, a compassionate, almost motherly woman to the villagers, who always pretty courageously tries to stand up for them, convinces the villagers to accept the deal, believing she could trick the devil by baptizing every child after birth. Christine is then cursed and transforms into a demonic black spider, causing havoc in the village. The curse is temporarily lifted by sacrificing another child, and Christine, now this demonic spider, is locked away by the mother of one of Christine's victims. The village then experiences a period of relative peace. However, a particularly malicious farmhand releases the demonic spider. Kristen, a nobleman, noble in character that is, sacrifices himself to capture and imprison the spider, restoring peace in the village. Now, the similarities of all of these stories is that a group of individuals is dealt an unfair and seemingly impossible task, which is definitely what happened to the soldiers. But I see a lot of similarities with the Black Spider in particular, especially in the characters. The villagers, for example, although not ignorant, are somewhat meek and lack action, much like HR, Jeremias, Corporal Valter, and Christine, who does take charge and attempt to lead, the best she can under such unfair circumstances, and make that hard choice, a choice which was most likely wrong, where you could argue she undersold her values, much like Florin, and the noble Kristen, who dives headfirst, no matter the consequences to himself, in order to do what's right, much like us, Kurdin. And that's kind of the meaning behind this story. Christine, on the surface, made a somewhat understandable choice, but she wasn't wrong in standing up for the villagers or even attempting to trick the devil, as the devil's offer is also unreasonable. She was wrong for undermining her values and giving in to temptation, and we will see this mirrored in the story of Mundaun. But moving on with the game though, Kurdin decides you will spend the night here so we can talk to Valter in the morning. You pick up this incense candle to put in your lantern and go to bed.
Eu estou urgente, ma ne fa peso von chi legge. Non era un po' spray la tua letta?
Or, never mind, you have to go do a little tinkle before bed, I guess.
Oh.
After defeating these straw men, you finally go to bed. In the morning, you talk to Corporal Valter, but there's not much information he can give us, as he lives in complete denial.
Ci hai quei omvegli.
Peu importe, vos plis. J'ai fini. Elle est depuis des decennies une prisonnière de la montagne.
Ti sbaglias. Gli omvegli libres.
Vous savez, nous avons enganou-elle, nous avons chauffé-elle, et arrêté-elle.
Even when you tell him what happened to Jeremias' chapel, he simply waves it all off, assured that the old man is still trapped in the mountains. He does give you the key to the cannon on top of the bunker, so that you can clear the way to the mountains. When making your way down to the Moval, you notice a strange reflection on the water. I thought this was really creepy when I first saw it, and I really love how the game doesn't even acknowledge it. No sound cue, it doesn't tell you in any way to look there, it's just there, watching your every move. I mean, it's the equivalent of those "you'll ship bricks when you see it" type images, but still, I think here it's, a little bit better. While we make our way to the Moval, I would like to talk about the names in the game, because I think there's some meaning behind them. First, the goat named Alegria. Alegria is a name of Latin origin, meaning essentially cheerfulness or happiness, and I think here it symbolizes pureness. It was sacrificed with no knowledge as to why, and all it did was help the soldiers with its milk. Then you have Valter, and you'll notice that the names of our forefathers have somewhat an ironic tone to them. Valter is a name of Germanic origin. It means commander of an army. But of course, Corporal Valter did anything except lead his men. Jeremias, of Hebrew origin, essentially means exalted by God. This would of course apply to Jeremias as he's a priest. But what kind of man, exalted by God, would watch and allow a deal with the old man to take place? Florin, of Latin origin, means to blossom, which is ironic seeing the baggage he left behind and how he ended up. With Florina, on the other hand, being just the female version of the name Florin, it does apply. After all, she consistently helps us throughout our journey, and she is also the youngest, so she is the hopeful future of the village. And lastly, for now at least, we have Curdin. Curdin is a name of Latin origin, and there's some debate on what the concrete meaning of it is, but it seems to mean brave counsel, or maybe advisor. This could have kind of a meta meaning behind it. Perhaps it refers to you as the player, being the decision maker in the narrative. At least, that's my theory of it anyway. Also, before we get to the Moval, would you believe me if I told you that there's a sled racing minigame? Because there is. I'm not sure if it serves any narrative purpose, but I do appreciate it as a fun little Easter egg. And now, actually moving on, you make your way past the painter's house and meet Florina. Tell her you'll be going to the top of the mountain, but like always, she doesn't respond. You pick up Alegria and call the Moval. There's this really cool mechanic I forgot to tell you about actually. If you look at these Moval ad posters, you'll notice that the actual Moval is missing. But look at it for long enough and the Moval appears. This is such a creative way to get back to the car, and is not only intuitive, but it also fits so well with the overall presentation of the game. I really like that. Before going to the summit, you have, or should, go back to Grandpa's house to use that weird key on the attic door. In the attic, you finally get Grandpa's rifle. Which you will definitely need for this upcoming section. Your goal now is to get the cable car started, and to do that, you gotta talk to this guy in this outhouse.
Ai cautici. Ci mira del Runal.
Yo, de pipia's ons.
Sas c'hai il Runal per mai?
Sas joy. Yo centoleni elektrische tea.
So you bring him his toilet paper and he turns on the power from the bathroom. Could you imagine if you go into like an establishment, and the way to turn the power on or off was in like the men's bathroom. Anyway, you turn on the cable cars and get on it. After a while, the cable car begins to slow down and you see a strange looking one on the other side.
Tisn't the nuts there and much neders e dinjaneders. Es no sempre nies wie de lor part de l'affair. Per cui, es que bedret, c'arrivo c'è sque c'è de fat per vos tuats quella volta.
The old man then resurrects the soldiers he helped get rid of, since he felt cheated out of his payment. You then land on the same barn from the visions of the past, and pick up the crystal Grandpa used to prick his finger and sign the contract. Making your way towards the bridge that leads to the mountain peak, you see Alegria's body on the other side of the blocked bridge. This was apparently a failsafe put in by Grandpa and the others to stop people from going into the peak. In order to unlock it, you have to find HR by putting Alegria's bell on a sleigh that will point to his location, killing any of the undead soldiers you find on the way. The shooting is a little bit janky, but overall it works just fine for what the game is trying to do. You find H.R. Serpentini, the father of Giovanni Serpentini, half buried in the snow. You pick up a shovel and begin to dig him out. He looks undead or cursed, definitely the work of the old man, and he seems to think, much like Corporal Valter, that the war is still going on. But in order to get him to give you more information, you need to find him some wine. While you're making your way towards the bar/pub, you find this. This is essentially the last enemy we have in the game. A large Yeti-like creature that is very slow, but extremely deadly. He's most likely based on the... I'm not trying to... no.
Czegete.
From the region of
Lötschental.
This creature/costume is usually seen with a purposely scary wooden mask, different kinds of pelts, and sometimes, much like our snow monster, a cowbell around the neck. This was, much like how we see in the movie The Wicker Man, sort of fertility ritual, most likely of pagan origin. Men, typically young men who were bachelors, would don this costume each year and chase and scare local single women, and would rub their ice-covered hands on the woman's face, which would really turn them on, I think. Making your way past them and into the bar, you pick up the wine and have a little break. You then leave the bar. I have no idea how you survive getting impaled by this icicle, but I assume it has something to do with the old man's mark. But yeah, there might be some plot hole here. Anyway, you get back on the sled and go give HR the wine, which makes him trust you, and he gives you the code to open the bridge gate. After asking him about this book that he wrote, which you find at the painter's house, or his son's house, HR then gets sucked into the snow. Now in order to open the gate, you have to go to these things and put in the respective pattern you see on the paper, all while avoiding getting shot by the soldiers and killed by the Yeti. With that done, you make your way to the bridge where it begins to rain stones again. You make it to a cove with eyes that follow your every move. You're definitely in the domain of the old man now. You find a skeleton of an animal where you place the head of the goat. Looking into her eyes, we see the moment Alegria was sacrificed, enraging the old man.
Tenornos convegno portainus atini, nolma non battegiada. Si olma e si pura, scoso pai l'alf, ed ella è libra. Rosala in Pasqua la Valla va Paradina.
And he does a little dance. Back in the present, Alegria suggests we try to destroy the contract, and perhaps that will undo all that has happened. As you make your way deeper into the cave, you place your lantern in this spot and see a reflection of a house on the water. Inside there's a painting of Kurdin, with two dark long hands on each shoulder. You go upstairs to what the game calls storage. There's an upside down chair and all you can hear is faint sobbing. It's Florin, your grandfather. Going up these stairs into heating, all we hear is whispering and murmuring. While still on fire, you go up another set of stairs into reception. One last flight of stairs and we're in administration, which seems to be some sort of office belonging to the old man. It contains all of his contracts, unmapped textures for some reason, and a letter decrying Serpentini for being vain, and that he has lost his use after freeing him and killing the contract breaker, Florin. But before we move on, let's talk about this whole process we went through, because the game never really gives you an explanation as to what actually happened there. I personally believe what we saw was a sort of devil's punishment process in an upside down order due to us being in this sort of reflection. Because if you remember, we only saw the old man's house through a reflection in the water. First you have administration, where the initial contract is kept, then reception, where you come face to face with the devil, then heating, where your initial punishment is dealt. Think of the burning of Grandpa's barn with him in it. Then finally, storage, where you wait in a purgatory-like space to finish your sentence, or for all eternity. At least that's my theory of it. If you have a better one, post it in the comments. I bet you won't, pussy. Anyway, when you search for the contract assigned to Florin, you find that it's not there. So you go... Looks like you've been knocked out by Serpentini again.
Not mother.
I say again because I believe he was the one who tried to kill you back in the B level. In the old man's notes, he decries Serpentini's vanity and seems to have an interest in us, Kurdin. My theory is that Serpentini already detected this and, being the narcissist that he is, tried to get rid of us. I mean, even here, as he's painting you, he mentions how he is envious of you. But more importantly, he mentions that the old man still carries the contract with him. When you ask him where the old man is now, he says he's on his way to collect, and we'll see what that means very soon. You then wake up in the office again. Serpentini painted you to look like the Reddit soy meme thing. Whatever you kids are doing now with your Riz Phantom Gats.
Sticking out your gat for the Rizzler.
In the other room, you look into the mirror to see Florina, but she gets scared of what Serpentini turned you into, and she runs towards the old man.
Florina! Eu sou Cordin!
You leave the cave and hurry down the mountain. I will say, it can be pretty nerve-wracking hearing the whistle when you get seen. The soldiers have terrible aim, but still, the game hasn't really set itself out to be like a big challenge, which is fine. Maybe it would be improved if the enemies were just a little bit sharper. Not that I'm much better, to be honest. You finally reach the Moval and make your way to the painter's house. You wall ride a little bit and finally reach it, to see Corporal Valter standing at the back door. You ask him where Serpentini is, and he says,
Vassi, de ben je ze zeker som bo fat berjacht. En dan jou afat mi meer possible. De verton mon jou mira so ja vinas junchile.
Adia, Corporal Valter.
Relâchou!
When you go upstairs, you see that he has drawn a basic stick figure hanging from the bridge.
Ma che quai?
You go to the bridge and have a nice little chat with him. He of course now tries to get on your good side. His name after all is Serpentini, a name of Latin origin, meaning serpent-like. You decide to stick to your values and morals, an important theme of the game by the way, and pull him up. The old man's mark then finally disappears, and he gives you the last ceramic tile to open the cellar where the burning barn painting is kept. You then leave, making your way towards the church, when suddenly, Jeremias stops you. Jeremias tells you that the old man has Florina in the church. He then gives you his cross, perhaps it'll help, and start heading towards the church. In the church, you see Florina on the altar, presumably to be sacrificed, and the old man's face integrated into the church.
Di demoni, la Iels.
Bagnia, la più nuova filiale dell'Enterprise. Grazie ci abbiamo presente della Iels.
You attempt to use the cross, but it seemingly doesn't work.
Lascia vedere. Sì. Ma vezi perché ti schiacciò la matetta in mia braccia.
Ti survens boella.
Ma perché no? Io svissi il contract. Ninja tribunal, profano voter. Decidesse a mia favor.
Ti gis manzegnas.
Corcia dies antenats me mi imbrugliò avanti per decennis. Era ufficio argentò. Ma ossa, vezza c'è quella stuvia nire da quella. Florin, di non o imbrugliò. Ossa dei Florin. Una provvidenza. Di se destin d'esser da mia part.
Die Bastard korrupt.
Exakt.
As he tries to consume Florina, you use the lantern and it seems to be working. Grabbing Florina's hand, you'll be taken back to the moment the contract was signed. Now you are here in the actual flesh. The logical thing to do is to stop the pact from happening. When you do that, you'll see that the approaching soldiers was just a trick by the old man to get them to make the pact in the first place.
Quei soldati de Tremais. Riestau de la bialanciata nel nausgante.
However, if you do stop the pact from happening, the old man will then get you as you're leaving Mundaun, giving you the bad ending. What you're supposed to do is allow the pact to happen. This is simply another bluff from the devil. The lantern was in fact working, and in a desperate attempt to save himself, he shows you this vision through Florina, feeds your ego, and makes you think that you are making the right decision. But remember, the goal was never to stop the pact from happening. It was simply to fix the mess our forefathers made, and not repeat their mistakes. If you remember the story, The Black Spider, Christine, much like our grandfather, was well-meaning, but abdicated her values of honor, justice, and overall goodness by making a pact with the huntsman. So we must be like Kristen and not succumb to the same temptation, to face tyranny, injustice, and evil head-on, no matter the consequences to ourselves. After allowing the pact to happen, you wake up in your grandfather's house. You then make your way to the church, now destroyed, and greet Jeremias, and he tells you that Florina is safe.
Nua ai Florina? Co vai con ella?
Ella è nua ed ella è popolesada. Io credo che ti aspendrau sei vita e sei olva.
You go to the previously burnt barn to find your deceased grandpa, on which Cordine comments,
El para de ruessa en paz.
You then begin the burial by talking to Valter. Say your last words.
Dat. Scoi para de vibiacchio se vevel bodetai. Ja spero che hai se veu data de finalmente fla la paz. Possa ti olmen fla il ruaus os. Ja sono fin.
Signor, dai degli ruaus perpetuum. La ies perpetua mossa la via. Che il ruaus sia in pace. Amen.
Amen.
And take the same bus out of Mundaun.